What's a horrifying experience you have lived through? Part 2. I was driving home from Target at around 8 p.m. at night and got the feeling the car behind me was following me. I started taking a very weird, circuitous way and they stayed behind me, not tailgating, but close enough to not lose me. Finally, they turned and I breathed a sigh of relief. Until I turned on a side street, saw an idling car with its lights off, and the headlights came on and they started following me again. I was freaking out and drove as fast as I safely could to the small town police station. When they saw me turn into the parking lot they sped off. I sat there until my adrenaline calmed down a bit. And then I drove home and promptly burst into tears. Closest I've ever come to living out a horror movie. I was once at my girlfriend's townhouse and they had a backyard with a shared fence with a family, or group of families. It was dark night. But one of those nights when the light of the town reflects off of the clouds so it's eerily light out. The fence between the townhome and the family house was old and worn out so you could see through the gaps if you really focused. We heard a blood-curdling scream "Noo!" followed by an immediate soul-crushing inhale. There was probably 50 feet between the glass sliding door we were at and the fence. They had their floodlights on. And it illuminated the silhouettes of the parents crying. Peering through the fence 50 feet away you could see a body swaying from the tree. Their son had hung himself and discovered it in the dead of night when their dog ran out to the backyard and activated the floodlights. We could only see through the small gaps in the fence and the shadows of the family experiencing it in real time. Still gives me chills every time I think about it. My sister has been telling me for years that something would happen to her in 2020. For years. She had a little girl in 2017 and insisted she had the baby for me. I have no kids. 2019, our father dies and they were not on good terms. My mother died estranged from her and that has to suck. I on the other hand took care of both of my parents. COVID-19 happens. Her son was then sexually assaulted. In April. My uncle's baby brother and probably one of the best men in the world died. We were devastated. In June. We began to notice her odd behaviors. Within a week began the most destructive and stunning downward spiral. I had to remove my nephews from her residence. She was in what we now know was a manic episode. Before all this, she was incredibly bright but the most stubborn person alive. So, her at a heightened level made her completely unwilling to seek any help. We had her committed several times and nothing worked. She has been arrested and jailed. Committed by the police as well. We are still attempting to help her but her condition has deteriorated in such a way that we know she may not survive. She lives in a world completely separate from us now. The worst part? She has posted everything on Facebook since June. To see her deteriorating through those posts is horrifying. It scares the fucking shit out of me because our brother has the same mental health issues. It's incredibly terrifying how quickly our mind can turn on us. I was home alone for the weekend when I was in high school, which was exciting for me as I never really had the house to myself ever. I had a few people over the Friday night and got hammered, then the next night it was just me home alone in my house. I had a case of beers left over and had a movie to watch, so I decided that the hangover would not keep me down and to party by myself and have an awesome night. I ended up getting way too drunk and felt hungry. I decided to cook a mad feat and started whipping up a pasta in a drunken slur. I was singing like a maniac while I played MasterChef in my kitchen thinking I was top shit. Halfway through singing and stirring the pasta sauce I hear a tapping sound and some movement in the corner of my eye catches my attention. One of the metal chain ropes used to pull the blinds up and down on the glass doors was moving and hitting the glass door, making a tapping sound. I froze as I watched it moving back and forth by itself. Then my focus kind of zoomed out as I realized that that was not the only metal blind ropes that were moving. We have around 7 sets of blinds on the glass doors and all 7 of the ropes were moving back and forth. My hairs stood up and I walked out of the kitchen as all of them were tapping on the glass doors. No windows or doors in the house were open and they were picking up momentum with the tapping becoming louder and more frequently. I turned around just in time to see the DVD case of the movie I was watching slide off the TV cabinet on its own. I let out a slurred forked thought and went to bolt outside, just freaking out. On the way out I saw the painting next to the front door. It had been moved and was tilted. I let out a gasp. I ran out the door and wet myself just a little in the process. Shit was real. The horror was real. This was real. Outside I was so distraught and horrified at what had just happened. My house was haunted. There was a fucking ghost and it was fucking with me. It didn't like me. I realized that I had left the stove on and that I needed to leave but needed to grab my phone to call someone and get out of there. I decided I would go to the park and try to contact a friend. So I psyched myself up. Ran into the house. Turned off the stove shitting myself. Ran into my room. Grabbed the key, my phone and 10 beers. I headed to the park and started drinking again. No one picked up as everyone was wiped out from the night before. Cut a long story short, I vaguely remember being at the park before I blacked out. Then in my kitchen crying at some point, then blank. The next day I woke up in my bed. I wondered whether it was just a dream, but I walked out and saw the pasta and DVD case and realized that it was legit. I realized that I had to break the news to my family later that day that our house was haunted and that we would have to move. I went on Facebook and that's when I saw status after status saying that there had been a minor earthquake during the night. Needless to say, I felt like a hungover idiot, but the truth is that was the first earthquake I had experienced, and we don't get earthquakes where I live. Or not usually, at least. When I was about 6, my parents dropped me off at this swimming lesson class. Now this was back in China over 2 decades ago. I remember that class had a lot of students. Anyways, I was scared of the water and didn't want to go in, and the teacher got frustrated and just tossed me in the deep end. To this day I remember clearly the panic I felt. The sheer fear as I choked and gauged on the pool water as I sunk lower and lower. It felt like ages before the teacher shoved a long pole into the pool for me to grab onto to pull me out. I remember the sensation of panic and edges of my vision getting dark. For several years after, I was so terrified of water going over my face that I had trouble showering and washing my hair. I had to force myself to take a deep breath, go under the water and scrub as fast as I can and step out. Every time my heart rate would go crazy and I would be on the edge of a panic attack. Anyways, it wasn't till I was in my mid-20s that this even came up during a family visit, and my grandmother told me that when Grandpa found out, he got so mad he called in favors from his army buddies, literally old revolutionary soldiers from Mao's days, to go in there with high-ranking government officials to scare the fuck out of that swimming school/teacher. Slept through, but my roommate told me about it. I was asleep while he was playing video games when I suddenly sat up and said, "Fuck this thunder. Yo," and laid down immediately after. 2 seconds later a jet flew overhead and created a sonic boom. When I was around 13 I had a tendency to stay up late and try to beat my current N64 game of choice over a weekend. One night I had decided to move my stuff to the living room. Now keep in mind our house had a hallway connected to the bedrooms, but the hallway had a door for some reason. So after moving everything to the living room I closed the door for the hallway to not wake up anyone. About 2 hours into my gaming session I started hearing tapping noises. So I paused my game and the noises stopped. Then for 10 minutes it got louder, yet this time coming from the sliding glass door in the den. At this point I ran to get my dad. He ran out of his room and went out back only to see someone jump the fence. Turned out that a local mental hospital had escaped early that evening according to the police who arrived. What was more creepy was the glass on the window was very close to breaking. I never once played video games in the living room again, and now I suffer from night terrors and a severe fear of looking out windows or doors at night. My son having an anaphylactic reaction while we driving down a major interstate in Atlanta. I had to pull over on the side of 285, the interstate, and give him an EpiPen injection. I called 911 and told them I was driving to CHOA, Children's Healthcare of Atlanta, emergency department, and coming in hot. And to be ready. Thankfully, we weren't far from the hospital. I have never been so terrified in my entire life. A few years ago I was sleeping, then all of a sudden I wake up. Then start hearing sounds in my room. It's kinda hard to explain, but something like the sound of your furniture when you put something on it. Or like the sound it makes during an earthquake. Like that. In this case, I was hearing it all around my room. Like there was something jumping across everywhere. I was terrified. LOL. I was aware some shit was happening, but I was too scared to peek around. At this point I was hiding under my blanket. Eventually the sound stopped and I gained enough courage to stick out my arm and reach my phone, which was on my nightstand. I turn it on and notice it's steamed. Like it had condensation all over the screen. Nothing else seemed out of place after that. And I had a really hard time going to sleep again that night. Edit, some mistakes. A few years ago I had a relationship with a girl who literally went from waking up in the morning and just sitting in her bed in tears of joy because she was convinced I was her soulmate. Planning her future with me. Meeting my parents and having her think she was lovely. To essentially just waking up one day and losing all feelings practically overnight. No explanation or even any desire to explore why. And I got the impression she didn't even understand why herself. Just an incredibly haunting moment of acceptance. Like she just knew and had to go with it. The fact that this is even possible within the human condition honestly terrifies me. She was so completely convinced we were meant to be. 2. She was always looking ahead towards our future together. Right down to details like how she wanted to have a pet fish when we moved in together one day. Then just, nothing. Thanks for watching.